evening, after a long nap, Stanley went with Mr. Dart to the famous museum. Mr. Dart took him into the main hall, where the best and most important paintings were hung. He pointed to a big painting that showed a man with a beard and a floppy velvet hat. The man was playing a violin for a lady who was lying on a couch. There was a half-man, half-horse person standing behind them. 3 fat children with wings were flying around at the top of the painting. That, Mr. Dart said, is the most expensive painting in the world. There was an empty picture frame on the opposite wall. We shall hear more about that later on. Mr. Dart took Stanley into his office and said, "It is time for you to put on a disguise." "I already thought of that," Stanley Lapchop said, "and I brought one, my cowboy suit. Nobody will know me in it." "No," Mr. Dart said, "you will have to wear the disguise I have picked out." He gave Stanley a long white dress, a pair of little pointed shoes, a wide straw hat, and a wig and a stick. The wig was made of long golden hair. The stick was curved at the top and had a ribbon on it. "In this shepherdess disguise," Mr. Dart said, "you will look like a painting that belongs in the main hall. We do not have cowboy pictures in the main hall." Stanley was disgusted. "I will look like a girl, that's what I will look like," he said. "I wish I had never had my idea." But he was a good sport, so he put on the disguise. Back in the main hall, Mr. Dart helped Stanley climb into the empty picture frame. Mr. Dart had put 4 small spikes in the wall, one for each hand and foot to rest on. The frame was a perfect fit. Against the wall, Stanley looked just like a picture. "Except for one thing," Mr. Dart said. "Shepherdesses are supposed to look happy. They smile at their sheep and at the sky. You do not look happy, Stanley." Stanley tried hard to get a faraway look in his eyes. He even tried to smile a little bit. Mr. Dart stood back a few feet and stared at him for a minute. "Well," he said, "it may not be art, but I like it." He went off to take care of the rest of Stanley's plan. Now Stanley was left alone. It was very dark in the main hall. A little bit of moonlight came through the windows, and Stanley could see the world's most expensive painting on the opposite wall. He felt as though the man with the violin, and the lady on the couch, and the half-horse person and the winged children were all waiting, as he was, for something to happen. Time passed, and Stanley got very, very tired. Maybe they won't come, he thought. Maybe the sneak thieves won't come at all. The moon went behind a cloud, and the main hall got pitch dark. Stanley felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle under his wig. Creak. The sound came from right out in the middle of the main hall. Stanley saw a tiny yellow line of light. The sound came again, and the light got bigger. A trap door had opened in the floor, and now 2 men came up through it. Stanley understood everything all at once. These must be the sneak thieves. They had a secret trap door into the museum. That was why they had never been caught. And now, tonight, they were back to steal the most expensive painting in the world. Stanley held very still in his picture frame and listened to the sneak thieves. "This is it, Max," said the first one. "This is where we pull a sensational job while everybody else is asleep." "Right, Luther," said the other man. "In all this great city, there is no one to stop us." "Ha-ha," thought Stanley Lapchop. "That's what you think." The sneak thieves put down their lantern. They took the world's most expensive painting off the wall. "What would we do to anyone who tried to capture us, Max?" the first man asked. "We would kill him. What else?" his friend said. That was enough to frighten Stanley. He was even more frightened at him. "This sheep girl," Luther said. "I thought sheep girls were supposed to smile, Max. This one looks scared." Just in time, Stanley got a faraway look in his eyes again and smiled, sort of. "You're crazy, Luther," Max said. "She's smiling. And what a pretty little thing she is, too." That made Stanley very angry. He waited until the sneak thieves had turned back to the world's most expensive painting. Then he shouted in his loudest voice, "Police! Police! Mr. Dart! The sneak thieves are here!" The sneak thieves looked at each other. Max, said the first one, I think I heard the sheep girl yell. I think I did too, said Max in a quivery voice. Oh boy, yelling pictures. We both need a rest. You'll get a rest, all right, shouted Mr. Dart. He came rushing in with the chief of police and lots of guards and policemen behind him. You'll get arrested, that's what. Ha ha ha. The policeman took the sneak thieves off to jail. The next morning, in the office of the chief of police, Stanley Lambchop got a medal. The day after that, his picture was in all the newspapers. Now Stanley was famous. Everywhere he went, people stared and pointed at him. He could hear them whisper, "Over there, Harriet, over there. That must be Stanley Lambchop, the one who caught the sneak thieves," and things like that. But after a few weeks, the whispering and the staring stopped. People had other things to think about. Stanley did not mind. Being famous had been fun, but enough was enough. And then came another change, and it was not a nice one. People began to laugh and make fun of him as he passed by. "Hello, super skinny," they would shout. Stanley told his parents how he felt. "It's the other kids I mind," he said. "They don't like me anymore because I'm different. Flat." "Shame on them," Mrs. Lambchop said. "It is wrong to dislike people for their shapes, or their religion for that matter, or the color of their skin." "I know," Stanley said. "Only maybe it's impossible for everybody to like everybody." "Perhaps," said Mrs. Lambchop, "but they can try." Later that night, Arthur heard the sound of crying. In the dark, he crossed the room to Stanley's bed. "Are you okay?" he said. "Go away," Stanley said. "Don't be mad at me," Arthur said. "You're still mad because I let you get caught in the tree the day you were my kite." "Skip it, will you?" Stanley said. "I'm not mad. Go away. Please, let's be friends." Arthur began to cry too. "Oh, Stanley," he said, "please tell me what's wrong." Stanley was quiet for a long time. "The thing is," he said, "I'm just not happy anymore. I'm tired of being flat. I want to be a regular shape again, like other people. But I'll have to go on being flat forever. It makes me sick." "Oh, Stanley," Arthur said. He dried his tears on a corner of Stanley's sheet. He could think of nothing more to say. "Don't talk about what I just said," Stanley told him. "I don't want the folks to worry. That would only make it worse." "You're brave," Arthur said. "You really are." He took hold of Stanley's hand. The two brothers sat together in the dark, being friends. They were still sad, but each one felt a little better than he had before. Suddenly, Arthur had an idea. He jumped up and turned on the light and ran to the big toy box. He began to dig through the box. Stanley sat up in bed to watch. Arthur pushed aside a football and some lead soldiers and airplanes and lots of wooden blocks, and then he said, "Aha!" He had found what he wanted, an old bicycle pump. He held it up, and Stanley and he looked at each other. "Okay," Stanley said at last, "but take it easy." He put the end of the long pump hose in his mouth and closed his lips about it so that no air could get out. "I'll go slowly," Arthur said. "If it hurts or anything, wiggle your hand at me." He began to pump. At first, nothing happened, except that Stanley's cheeks puffed out a bit. Arthur kept on pumping. Then, suddenly, Stanley's top half began to swell. It's working, shouted Arthur, pumping away. Stanley spread his arms so that the air could get around inside of him. He got bigger and bigger. The buttons of his pajama top popped off. Pop, pop, pop. A minute more, and he was all rounded out, head and body, arms and legs. But not his right foot. That foot stayed flat. Arthur stopped pumping. It's like trying to do the very last bit of those long balloons, he said. Maybe a shake would help. Stanley shook his right foot twice, and with a little whooshing sound, it swelled out to match the left one. There stood Stanley Lambchop as he used to be, as if he had never been flat at all. Thank you, Arthur, Stanley said. Thank you very much. The brothers were shaking hands, when Mr. Lambchop came into the room with Mrs. Lambchop right behind him. "We heard you," said Mr. Lambchop. "Up and talking when you should be asleep, eh? Shame on—" "George," said Mrs. Lambchop, "Stanley's round again." "You're right," said Mr. Lambchop. "Good for you, Stanley." "I did it," Arthur said. "I blew him up." Everyone was very excited and happy, of course. Mrs. Lambchop made hot chocolate, and several toasts were drunk to Arthur for his cleverness. When the little party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop tucked the boys back into their beds and kissed them, and then they turned out the light. "Good night," they said. "Good night," said Stanley and Arthur. It had been a long and tiring day. Very soon, all the Lambchops were asleep. And that's the end of the story of Flat Stanley.